Welcome back to Green Flag Racing. We are flying through the 2026 Formula One season. It got off to a rocking start last weekend in Australia, down in Melbourne. It looks like a completely different sport right now. Whether that's a good thing or not, we're going to continue to find out. We've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to run through everything that happened in Australia, give you the big storylines heading into this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix, which is also a sprint weekend, by the way. And yes, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, these 2026 regulations, and whether F1 might have accidentally shot itself in the foot already. Let's dive right into it. The Australian Grand Prix took place last weekend down in Melbourne at Albert Park. George Russell was your winner. Kimi Antonelli, a Mercedes 1-2. Kimi Antonelli in second. Charles Leclerc in third. Lewis Hamilton fourth. Lando Norris fifth, holding off Max Verstappen in sixth, coming all the way from P20. But before we get into the full race breakdown, let's start with qualifying, because qualifying in 2026 is chaotic and different than what we're used to, that's for sure. Max Verstappen was gone in Q1. You don't see mistakes like that from him. I know it wasn't necessarily driver error, but we never see Max Verstappen in a position like that. Out in Q1, he locked his rear brakes heading into turn one, spun it straight into the wall. Didn't set a time, P20. Carlos Sainz had a power unit issue in Q1, and he finished P21 as well. Kimi Antonelli crashed in FP3, and the Mercedes mechanics on his side of the garage absolutely desperately repaired that car in the background while qualifying started. He managed to get one lap in Q1, which was a savior to get him through. And honestly, it was a great performance from him to stick his car P2 after that crash in FP3. Kid's really impressive. George Russell took pole. Mercedes had the front row locked out with Kimi Antonelli in second. George Russell was 8/10 clear of the first non-Mercedes car. 8/10. Race was a lot closer, but it's a daunting performance in the first qualifying session of the season from George Russell. He told Sky Sports he thinks they had a 10th or 2 advantage during the race. But then we get to race day, and on the reconnaissance lap, the hometown hero, Oscar Piastri, in his home race, packed grandstand with his name on it, he goes out on his reconnaissance lap, hits the curb on the exit of turn 4, totally unexpected surge of power from the Mercedes engine, and he bins it into the wall. He's done before the race even starts at his home Grand Prix. He said the car just snapped, and it was basically backwards by the time he had a chance to react. A shocking start on the Sunday, on race day. Just another data point about how unpredictable these new cars are. Verstappen and George Russell both also reported battery surges or dead batteries on the grid as well. So this seems to be a common thing across multiple teams, across multiple engines. So something to keep an eye on. Then we dive into the race itself, and what a mental start that it was. Ferrari had spent the preseason dominating starts, or at least that was the talk of the town, is that Ferrari has engineered a car that's perfect for race starts in 2026, and that rang true. Off the line, Charles Leclerc came from P4 and very quickly by turn 1 was into the lead ahead of George Russell. First 15 laps were super exciting. Those two were swapping positions, that yo-yoing that they were doing with their boosts, using their energy boosts, responding with boosts. It was genuinely very, very fun to watch for those first 15 laps. Then came the strategy call that pretty well decided the race. Virtual safety car came out. Isaac Hadjar was retiring, and Mercedes immediately boxed both cars, double stacked in their pit box, and Ferrari decided to stay out with both cars. Pretty shocking. I'm not sure at that point in the race why there's any reason why you don't split strategy. You heard Lewis Hamilton over the radio expressing that to his engineer, that there's no point in leaving both cars out. Why don't they split the strategy? Martin Brundle said on the broadcast what Ferrari gave up was track position, and then they lost control of the race. Hindsight 2020, maybe they go on to win that race or have a shot at the win. Maybe they don't, but they definitely would have given themselves a better shot at it, I believe at least. Mercedes came out on hard tires. They managed the car beautifully for 35 plus laps and kind of cruised home to victory. And that's been the talk since too, is that were they holding back performance then because they had such a large lead on the Ferraris chasing them down? George Russell came home 2.5 or 2.9 seconds ahead of Kimi Antonelli. Leclerc in third. Hamilton was just 0.6 seconds back of his teammate in fourth. He had real pace in that and said there was a lot of positives he's going to be taking from that first weekend. Overall, he seems to like these cars far more than those few years of those dreaded ground effect cars for Lewis Hamilton. And then a chasm to Lando Norris, 50 seconds back of the lead. He held off Max Verstappen for 5th. Verstappen drove from dead last to 6th, which sounds amazing on the surface, but like he said, it was kind of just clearing traffic and driving by cars that were 2 seconds slower than him, but he was never really in the mix to challenge. He challenged Norris, but he really didn't have it in him to challenge the likes of Hamilton or Leclerc in 3rd and 4th. You then had Ollie Behrman in 7th for Haas, Arvid Lindblad on debut coming home 8th for Racing Bulls. He had a phenomenal weekend in my opinion. And then Gabriel Bortoleto 9th for Audi on their F1 debut as well, and Pierre Gasly picking up a point for Alpine in 10th. And then Haas just missed out on double points. Esteban Ocon coming home in 11th. Championship standings, Russell, Antonelli, Leclerc is your podium in the championship after round 1. And then let's dive into this regulation debate that continues to dominate headlines across the paddock. F1's headline was that they had 120 overtakes in Australia. Last year it was only 45, triple the action. And they threw this graphic up on their social media to tell you all about it. But a huge section of the paddock absolutely hates these overtakes and how they're getting done and being done. And I can understand it. I've been trying to hold off on absolutely sewering these regulations after one race. Lando Norris, reigning world champion, already changing his tune from preseason. You're hearing this already, that these cars might be the worst F1 ever produced. A couple weeks ago, he was telling Max Verstappen if he doesn't like it, he should get out. But so change of tune from Lando Norris there. He called the racing very artificial, which I would have to agree with. And crucially, he raised safety concern. When one car deploys their boost and another car is harvesting, you can have closing speeds of almost 30, 40, and 50 kilometers per hour in the middle of the straight. And he said someone's going to fly over the fence. Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen, same chorus from them. The complaint isn't about that there is overtakes. It's about that the overtakes are happening because of battery percentages and not from racecraft. But then I guess, do you turn that around and you say managing your battery is racecraft? I don't think so, but I can see the argument being made. George Russell, shockingly, loves these cars. Loves that he's winning a race. He said, look, he won, take it with what you will, but he made a fair point that very few drivers loved the previous cars, which is totally true as well. They were stiff, they were heavy. Drivers complained about them all the time too. But Charles Leclerc came back and said that the lead battle with Russell was like having a blue shell in Mario Kart. Can't buy this type of content. Like I said, leave the microphone in front of these guys at all times. The FIA and F1 seem to be taking this pretty seriously off the hop. There's already reports that there's going to be regulation changes early on. They're reviewing energy management settings, specifically the harvest and deployment levels of these batteries, and anything needed that needs urgent changing could be introduced as early as the Japanese Grand Prix, March 29th. That's only 2.5 weeks away. So they seem to be taking another data point from China this weekend, and they're going to make potential changes to the regulations heading into Japan. So something to continue to keep an eye on. And then let's get to China. The big storylines coming out of Australia and heading into the Chinese Grand Prix. Can anyone stop Mercedes? It was an ominous weekend from Mercedes and an ominous weekend from George Russell. It really looks like it's going to have to be Kimi Antonelli that takes a step in order to challenge for the World Championship this year. Otherwise, I'm afraid we're going to watch George Russell, and not afraid, sorry. George Russell would be a very good champion to have. But if he walks away with this, we're just in for a dominant season. They were dominant in qualifying. The gap was genuinely pretty shocking. Race trim, Ferrari brought it back within a couple tenths. It was competitive until that VSC where Ferrari decided not to split strategies, and then it was a done deal for the most part. If they hadn't blinked on strategy, who knows what we could have seen, but we can only go off what we did see. And what we did see was George Russell and Kimi Antonelli driving off into the distance. China should actually suit Mercedes more than Australia, which is unfortunate. It's got that 1.2 kilometer back straight where their straight line speed advantage could be very, very big. Harder to see it's hard to see anyone beating them this weekend. We will see, though. Storyline number 2, the race start problem. This is a genuine concern, and it seems like Ferrari is the one continuing to block any changes to this because they have the starts figured out, which I can also appreciate from Fred Vasseur. But beyond the racing, the safety conversation that has to happen. Liam Lawson lost all power at lights out in Melbourne. He dropped from 8th to 18th before turn 1, and he just about had Franco Colapinto driving in the back of his engine, or driving in the back of his gearbox. It was an exceptional save by Franco. The FIA should be sending him flowers for saving their asses, because this could have been a huge, huge problem and a scathing start to these new regulations. But what he managed to catch it and get to the right of Liam Lawson and around him. I'm sure he needed a new pair of underwear after the race to go with it. If you haven't seen the onboard, highly recommend going to watch it. It is a ridiculous save from Franco. But this is a direct consequence of removing the MGUH, adding this extra battery power. It just takes so much time to charge up these turbos, and everyone on the grid is at a risk of their battery not being where it needs to be in order to start the Grand Prix. And that's just what we saw with Liam Lawson, and luckily Franco was able to save it. Liam Lawson said it was quite dangerous. Sergio Perez says it's a matter of time until we see a massive shunt. These aren't back markers complaining. This is a grid problem across the board. Is China where the FIA acts on this? Shanghai has longer, heavier braking zones than Melbourne, means more natural energy recovery and theoretically cleaner starts, theoretically cleaner racing. But if this problem repeats itself this weekend, and if we do end up seeing an accident off the start, expect the FIA to move quickly in the weeks leading up to the Japanese Grand Prix. Changes to energy deployment limits could come as early as Japan, like we said. Round 2 is essentially another diagnostic test for the FIA before making any changes. Now, we do have to address a bit of the elephant in the room, and that is the potential for the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix to be canceled coming up here soon. They're rounds 4 and 5 on the calendar. They're scheduled for mid-April and are potentially being canceled. Why? Simple. The situation in the Middle East, the war in Iran. There have been multiple strikes in Bahrain and Saudi, including one that was 15 miles from the Bahrain F1 circuit. A Pirelli tire test in Bahrain has already been canceled. The Dubai International Airport has been targeted. F1 have said there's no issue with their next couple races, China and Japan. Obviously, they're not in the Middle East and are going ahead as planned. But after Japan on the 29th of March, the freight would traditionally go directly to Bahrain, and a decision needs to be made within the next 2.5 weeks or so on that. Now they're getting pressure from team principals to make a decision sooner rather than later on this. Reports right now suggest there's going to be no replacements. There was a couple things that said Imola and Portimao might be discussed, but logistically it seemed like it wasn't going to work. And then the calendar would drop to 22 races, and there would be no races in April. There'd be about a 5-week break between Japan and Miami if both those races do indeed get canceled, which I find it hard to believe that they will go ahead. So I would expect cancellation, and basically we'll get a spring break instead of a summer break as well. Now, all that to say, let's dive into the actual race weekend here in China. It's a sprint weekend, so one-hour practice session for all these teams to get these complicated and new cars set up. Chaos seems to be on the menu again. Friday, one practice session straight into sprint qualifying. You get 1 hour practice before setting the grid up for a sprint race. Brand new cars, chaos, high potential. Saturday, sprint race and Grand Prix qualifying, 2 separate competitive sessions. Sunday, 56 laps at the Shanghai International Circuit. Like we mentioned earlier, what's going to make Shanghai far different to Melbourne? We heard last weekend a lot of pundits talking about how Melbourne will be one of the most energy-starved circuits on the calendar. Shanghai will be far different. Big braking zones in turns 1, 6, 11, and 14. Batteries should have a better opportunity to recharge naturally under braking. Shanghai should be better for energy management, which means hopefully the racing is cleaner, less artificial yo-yo effect that we saw. But hey, I mean, excitement is excitement at this point. I will take those first 15 laps over the next 30 that we watched last weekend. Circuit also has 4 straight mode zones in 2026, replacing the old DRS zones. That iconic 1.2 kilometer back straight is going to be wild with these boosts. I hope, at least. Ferrari are bringing their upside down rear wing. Finally, we saw this in testing. We were wondering if they were even going to bring it anywhere or if they had just been the idea. They didn't like the data. But hopefully we see this for the first time in a competitive session. I'm interested to see that. My predictions for the weekend. It's a Mercedes, sweet. I'm going sprint pole and the sprint win. I'll go with Kimi Antonelli. I think he gets onto things early here. And then Grand Prix pole and the Grand Prix itself, George Russell will win. Hopefully the Ferraris can throw a wrench into this. And hopefully, I don't know, we'll see where Red Bull's at as well. We didn't see Max Verstappen. Isaac Hadjar was having a solid weekend up until his retirement. The McLarens at this point, after round 1 at least, looked 4th fastest, but we'll have to see where things go this weekend. So to summarize, we're heading into round 2 of the season. We've already got regulation controversy, a geopolitical crisis impacting the calendar, multiple world champions bagging on their cars. George Russell absolutely loves his life, driving off into the distance. One of the most chaotic and compelling starts to an F1 season that I can remember. This weekend, sprint format in Shanghai. First competitive outing for Ferrari's reversible rear wing. Can Oscar Piastri get back on track? Max Verstappen, what can he do with a full weekend and no accidents? F1's new era gets its 2nd test of the season. I'll be covering every session, whether it be shorts or long form video. We'll have some content coming your way. Feel free to keep up with us. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.